Her small hand reached toward the snarling beast that had torn through three grown men, and in one breathless moment, the most dangerous man in the city watched a miracle unfold. The warehouse district smelled of rust and old blood, a scent Luka Perkins had grown to appreciate. It meant business was good. Bad for someone else, but good for him. He stood in the center of his domain, a converted industrial space that served as headquarters, courtroom, and occasionally execution chamber. The concrete floors bore stains that no amount of bleach could erase, though Luka never bothered trying. They served as reminders, warnings etched in permanence. At his feet, chained to a reinforced steel post, lay the reason three of his best enforcers were currently in the hospital. Brutus. The English Bulldog was a monster wrapped in wrinkled flesh. 120 pounds of muscle, scarred hide, and pure malice. His previous owner, a rival who'd made the fatal mistake of thinking he could move product through Luka's territory, had trained the dog for fighting. When Luka had eliminated the competition, he'd kept the dog. A trophy. A symbol. Except Brutus recognized no master. The dog's low growl rumbled through the warehouse as one of Luka's men approached with a food bowl. The man, Marco, 20 years in the organization, feared on 3 continents, stopped 10 feet away, his hand trembling. "Boss, I can't." "Leave it," Luka said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet that made men confess sins they hadn't committed yet. Marco set the bowl down and retreated like he was backing away from a landmine. Luka watched the dog with something approaching respect. In Brutus, he saw a mirror, something the world had tried to break and failed. The dog's eyes, amber and cold, held the same calculation Luka had perfected over 37 years of survival in a world that ate the weak for breakfast. His phone buzzed. A text from his second-in-command. "The Kozlov meeting is set. Tuesday. The docks." Luka's jaw tightened. The Kozlovs were making moves, testing boundaries. They'd need to be reminded why those boundaries existed. Blood would be shed. Just a question of whose. He pocketed the phone and turned toward the exit, his Italian leather shoes clicking against concrete. Behind him, Brutus's chain rattled as the dog lunged, snapping at empty air, where Luka had stood moments before. No one could tame that dog. Luka wouldn't have it any other way. 3 miles away, in a world that might as well have been another planet, Briella Horton sat on the cracked steps of St. Catherine's Home for Children, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and bruised purple. She was 7 years old, with tangled blonde hair that refused to stay in the ponytails. Miss Rosemary attempted each morning, and eyes the color of summer sky, the kind of blue that made people smile and then feel sad, though Briella never understood why. The other children were inside, fighting over the television remote or trading secrets about which families might choose them during next week's adoption event. Briella had stopped attending those events 6 months ago. She learned that hope was a currency she couldn't afford. Her fingers traced the worn edge of a photograph she kept in her pocket, her only possession from before. A woman with Briella's same blonde hair and blue eyes, holding a baby. On the back, written in fading ink, "My brave girl, always." "Briella," Miss Rosemary's voice carried through the screen door. "Dinner in 10 minutes, sweetheart. Don't wander off." "I won't," Briella called back, though her feet were already carrying her down the steps. She didn't mean to disobey, but the old dog, the one that lived behind the fence 3 houses down, hadn't eaten in 2 days. She'd watched the elderly owner being taken away in an ambulance yesterday, and no one had come back. The dog scared the other kids. It was large, with matted fur and a bark that sounded like rolling thunder. But Briella had been bringing it scraps from dinner, slipping them through the fence posts when no one was looking. Fear, she'd learned, was just loneliness wearing a disguise. She made her way down the broken sidewalk, past houses with paint peeling like sunburned skin, past Mrs. Chen's garden where tomatoes grew in defiant bursts of red against the urban gray. The evening air was thick and warm, carrying the scent of someone's barbecue and the distant wail of sirens, the city's lullaby. Behind the chain-link fence, the old German shepherd saw her coming and struggled to its feet, tail attempting a weak wag. Briella smiled, pulling a piece of ham from her pocket, her entire dinner portion wrapped in a napkin. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, kneeling by the fence. "I know you're hungry. Me too. But you're bigger, so you need it more." The dog's brown eyes softened as it gently took the food from her small fingers. In that moment, Briella felt something she couldn't name, a sense of purpose, of mattering to someone. Even if that someone had 4 legs and couldn't speak. Tomorrow, she'd decided, she would find a way to help this dog properly. Maybe talk to Miss Rosemary. Maybe find the old man's family. Tomorrow she'd be brave. What Briella didn't know was that tomorrow would bring her face to face with a monster wearing a spiked collar, and the most dangerous man in the city would watch her do the impossible. What would you do if you encountered something everyone else feared? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. The collision of their worlds happened on a Tuesday morning in the parking lot of Giovanni's Fresh Market, a place where soccer moms bought organic kale and gangsters laundered money through inflated produce prices. Luka had stopped by to collect his percentage from Giovanni personally. Some debts required a face-to-face reminder. Brutus sat in the back of his black Escalade, windows cracked just enough for air, but not enough for escape. The dog had been more agitated than usual this morning, sensing something Luka couldn't identify. The beast's instincts were sharp, sharper than most of his men's. Luka emerged from the market, an envelope thick with cash tucked inside his jacket, when he heard the commotion. "Get away from that car!" A woman's voice, shrill with panic. "Someone call the owner! There's a child!" His blood turned to ice. Luka moved fast, rounding the Escalade to find a small crowd gathering near the rear passenger door. The window he'd left, cracked, was now somehow fully open. The child's safety lock must have malfunctioned. And standing on the running board, her small frame half disappeared into his vehicle, was a little girl with wild blonde hair, with Brutus. "Nobody move," Luka commanded, his voice cutting through the panic like a blade through silk. The crowd parted instinctively, recognizing predator posture even if they didn't know his name. Luka approached the vehicle, every muscle coiled, expecting to see carnage. Small limbs, blood, the kind of nightmare that would haunt even him. What he saw instead stopped him cold. Briella sat cross-legged in his back seat, her tiny hand resting on top of Brutus's massive, scarred head. The dog, the same animal that had sent 3 grown men to the emergency room last week, lay with his enormous head in her lap, eyes half closed, making a sound Luka had never heard from him before. Purring. The damn dog was purring like an oversized, violent cat. "Hi," Briella said, looking up at Luka with those impossibly blue eyes. No fear, no recognition of the danger she just walked into. "Your dog was sad. I could hear him crying." Luka's mouth went dry. Brutus didn't cry. Brutus destroyed. "Step out of the vehicle," he said, keeping his voice level despite the chaos rioting through his chest. Slowly. Briella tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made him feel exposed, like she could see past the expensive suit, past the reputation, straight down to the parts of himself he'd buried under concrete and cruelty. "He's not mean," she said matter-of-factly. "He's just hurt. See?" She pointed to a spot behind Brutus's ear, where the fur was matted. Something stuck in there. It's making him angry. Before Luka could stop her, before his brain could catch up to the insanity unfolding, Briella's small fingers worked at the spot she'd indicated. Brutus remained still, docile, as if he were a different animal entirely. She pulled something free, a thick thorn embedded deep, with dried blood crusted around its base. "There," she said, showing it to Luka like a trophy. "That's better, isn't it, buddy?" Brutus responded by licking her face with a tongue the size of a small steak, his stub tail wagging with enough force to rock his entire back end. The crowd gasped. Someone whispered, "Impossible." Luka stood frozen, his carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. This child, this tiny, fearless child, had done in seconds what he couldn't accomplish in 6 months. She'd reached something in that dog that he'd believed was unreachable. She'd reached something in him, too. "What's your name?" The question escaped before he could stop it. "Briella Horton. I live at St. Catherine's." She scratched Brutus behind his ears, and the dog's eyes closed in contentment. "What's his name?" "Brutus." "That's a strong name." She smiled, and it was like watching sunrise in the middle of his endless night. "But I think he needs a friend. Don't you have anyone to take care of him properly?" The question landed like a punch to the sternum. Around them, the crowd was murmuring, phones appearing to record the impossible scene. Luka's mind raced through calculations, witnesses, exposure, complications. This girl had just created a problem wrapped in an enigma, tied with a bow of pure chaos. And yet, watching her gentle hand soothe the beast no one else could touch, Luka felt something crack inside his chest. Something he'd thought had turned to stone years ago. "Come on, kid," he heard himself say. "Let's get you back to wherever you're supposed to be before someone calls the police." Briella climbed out of the vehicle, and Brutus actually whimpered at her departure, a sound of loss so profound it echoed in Luka's own hollow spaces. As he watched her wave goodbye to his dog, her small hand covered in dog slobber and completely unafraid, Luka Perkins realized something terrifying. His life was about to change, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do to stop it. The drive to St. Catherine's Home for Children took 12 minutes. 12 minutes, during which Luka questioned every decision he'd made in the past hour. Briella sat in the passenger seat, buckled in, her legs swinging several inches above the floor mat. She hummed a tune he didn't recognize, occasionally glancing back at Brutus, who watched her through the partition with an expression Luka could only describe as lovesick. "You shouldn't get into strangers' cars," Luka said, the irony of a man like him giving safety advice not lost on him. "You're not a stranger," Briella replied simply. "You're Brutus's dad." The word dad hit him like a gut shot. Luka's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He'd never been anyone's father, never wanted to be. His own had been a monster who taught him that love was just another word for leverage, something to exploit until it broke. "I have a question," Briella said, turning those unsettling blue eyes on him. "Why do you keep Brutus if you can't make him happy?" The question was innocent, childlike in its directness, but it carved straight through to truths Luka spent most of his life avoiding. "It's complicated," he said. "Adults always say that when they don't want to tell the truth." Smart kid. Dangerous combination. Smart and fearless. They pulled up to St. Catherine's, a 3-story building that had seen better decades. The paint was fading, the playground equipment rusty, but flower boxes lined the windows. Someone's attempt to inject hope into poverty. Luka put the vehicle in park, but didn't kill the engine. This was where the story ended. Drop off the kid. Return to his world of blood and business. Forget this strange detour ever happened. Briella unbuckled her seatbelt but didn't move to leave. Can I visit him? She asked. Brutus. He needs someone. That's not a good idea. Why not? Because I'm not safe. Because my world eats innocence for breakfast. Because you did something impossible today, and I don't know what to do with impossible. Because, Luka said instead. Briella studied him with that X-ray vision children possessed. The kind that saw through lies to the wounded truth beneath. Then she did something that cracked him open like a fault line splitting earth. She reached across the center console and patted his hand. It's okay to be scared, she said softly. I'm scared lots of times. But being brave means doing good things even when you're scared. Luka stared at her small hand on his scarred knuckles. Knuckles that had broken bones, pulled triggers, ended lives. Her touch was warm, gentle, absolutely without judgment. Before he could respond, the orphanage door burst open. A woman in her 50s rushed out, relief and worry warring on her face. Briella Horton, where have you been? We've been looking everywhere. Miss Rosemary's eyes landed on the Escalade. On Luka's face, visible through the windshield, and her expression shifted to protective suspicion. Who is this man? Briella opened the door and hopped down. He gave me a ride home. His dog needed help. She turned back to Luka. Smiled that sunrise smile. Thank you, Mr. Perkins, he said quietly. Luka Perkins. Recognition flickered in Miss Rosemary's eyes. Fear followed close behind. Everyone in this city knew that name, or at least the rumors that surrounded it. Come inside, Briella. Now. Miss Rosemary's hand gripped the girl's shoulder, pulling her toward safety. Briella waved at Brutus through the window. The dog's tail wagged, and he let out a bark that wasn't aggressive. It was pleading. As the orphanage door closed behind them, Luka sat in his vehicle, engine idling, feeling like he'd just lost something he never knew he needed. His phone buzzed, reality reasserting itself. Kozlov meeting moved up. Tonight. Come armed. Back to business. Back to the world that made sense, where problems were solved with bullets and leverage, where dogs were weapons, and children didn't exist. Except now, one did. Luka looked at Brutus in the rearview mirror. The dog stared back at the orphanage, still whimpering softly. I know, buddy, Luka murmured. I know. He put the vehicle in drive and pulled away, but not before noticing a small figure in an upper window. Blonde hair catching the afternoon light, a small hand pressed against the glass. Watching him leave. Something twisted in his chest, sharp and unfamiliar. Luka Perkins had faced down cartel bosses, Russian mobsters, and federal agents without flinching. But one 7-year-old girl with fearless blue eyes had just brought him to his knees. And the most terrifying part? He wanted to turn around. The Kozlov meeting went sideways at 11:47 p.m. Luka had expected tension. These things always carried the potential for violence. What he hadn't expected was for Dmitry Kozlov to open negotiations by sliding a photograph across the table. A photograph of Briella, taken that afternoon outside St. Catherine's. Interesting company you're keeping these days, Perkins, Dmitry said, his accent thick as fog. Little girl, big heart, sweet thing, visiting orphanages now? Going soft in your old age? Every man at the table went silent. They could feel the temperature drop, could sense the predator awakening. Luka's voice came out quiet, lethal. Where did you get this? I have eyes everywhere, you know this. Dmitry leaned back, confident. Question is, what's she worth to you? The threat hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Luka's hand moved to his waistband where his Glock rested. Around the table, safeties clicked off. His 3 men against Dimitri's 5. Bad odds, but Luka had survived worse. "You touch that child," Luka said, each word carved from ice, "and I will burn your entire organization to the ground. Your men, your family, everyone you've ever loved. Ash and memory." Dimitri laughed, but it sounded nervous. "Big talk for..." The warehouse door exploded inward. Not from Kozlov's men, not from Luka's, from Brutus. The dog must have broken through the Escalade's window, something he'd never managed before. Now he stood in the doorway, 120 pounds of fury and muscle, blood on his muzzle from the broken glass, eyes locked on the photograph of Briella on the table. The dog charged, not at Dimitri, not at anyone holding a weapon, at the photograph. Brutus grabbed it in his massive jaws and retreated to the corner, settling down with it between his paws like a sacred artifact, guarding it with a low, continuous growl that dared anyone to approach. The absurdity of the moment, a negotiation derailed by a dog protecting a picture, would have been funny if it weren't so revealing. Dimitri stared. "What the hell?" "Meeting's over," Luka said, standing. His men rose with him, weapons drawn but not aimed. "You came here to test me, Dimitri. To see if the rumors were true, if I'd gone soft. Here's your answer. I'm worse than I've ever been, because now I have something to protect." He moved toward Brutus, and miraculously, the dog let him approach, let him take the crumpled photograph. Briella's face, slightly torn now, smiled up at him. "You stay away from St. Catherine's," Luka continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute promise. "You stay away from that girl. You even think about her, and what I do to you will become legend. Are we clear?" Dimitri's jaw worked. He'd miscalculated badly, pushed the wrong pressure point. "Clear," he finally said. Luka walked out, Brutus at his heels, leaving behind a room full of dangerous men who'd just witnessed something impossible. The city's most feared criminal claiming a weakness, admitting he had a heart after all. The drive back to his penthouse was silent, except for Brutus's heavy breathing in the back seat. Luka's hands shook on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from fury at how close danger had come to an innocent child. A child who'd shown him kindness without agenda, who'd touched his untouchable dog and cracked open his untouchable heart. At a red light, Luka pulled out his phone and made a call he'd never imagined making. "Romano, I need you to set up a trust fund, anonymous, St. Catherine's Home for Children." He paused. "And find out what it takes to become a foster parent in this state." The light turned green. Behind him, Brutus made that purring sound again, the one reserved only for thoughts of Briella. Luka understood completely. Some forces in this world couldn't be fought. Some tiny, fearless girls with blue eyes and gentle hands just walked into your life, tamed your monsters, and refused to leave your thoughts. Tomorrow, he'd figure out how a man like him could possibly be part of a child's life. Tonight, he just drove through the city with his impossible dog, carrying a crumpled photograph like a talisman against the darkness. For the first time in 37 years, Luka Perkins believed in redemption. All because of one brave little girl who changed everything in seconds. 3 weeks later, Briella sat in Miss Rosemary's office, confusion written across her face. "Someone wants to meet you," Miss Rosemary said, her expression complicated, equal parts hope and concern. "He's been very persistent and very generous." The door opened and Briella's eyes went wide. Luka Perkins stood in the doorway, And for once in his life, the most dangerous man in the city looked nervous. He wore jeans instead of a suit, as if dressing down might make him less intimidating. It didn't work. Power radiated from him like heat from asphalt. But the effort touched something in Briella's chest. "Hi, Mr. Perkins," she said, smiling. "Is Brutus okay?" "He's in the car," Luka said, his voice softer than Miss Rosemary remembered from their phone conversations. "He's been difficult. Won't eat properly. Won't settle. The vet says there's nothing physically wrong." "He misses me," Briella said with the confidence of absolute knowledge. "Yeah," Luka admitted, "he does." A pause stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. "I miss him too," Briella added quietly. Then, even more quietly, "I miss you too." Something in Luka's chest, something that had been frozen for decades, finally completely thawed. He knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. Up close, he could see the old photograph peeking out of her pocket. Her mother's picture, the only family she had left. "Briella," he said carefully, "how would you feel about spending some time with Brutus and me? Maybe on weekends at first. We could go to the park, get ice cream, normal stuff." "Normal stuff?" Briella's eyebrow raised. "You don't seem like a normal stuff person." Despite everything, Luka laughed. A sound so rusty Miss Rosemary actually startled. "No," he agreed. "But I could learn. If you wanted to teach me." Briella studied him with those X-ray eyes, seeing past the scars and the reputation to the lonely man underneath. The one who kept an angry dog because he understood anger. The one who'd threatened war over a photograph. The one who'd driven across the city just to ask if she was okay. "Can I tell you a secret?" Briella whispered, leaning forward. Luka nodded. "I've been praying for a family, a real one. I stopped believing it would happen, but I kept praying anyway." Her blue eyes shimmered. "Do you think maybe God has a sense of humor, sending me a Mafia boss and a Bulldog?" The words hit Luka like a bullet to the chest, painful and transformative. "I think," he said, his voice rough with emotion he'd forgotten how to express, "that if God exists, he knows I need you as much as Brutus does. Maybe more." Miss Rosemary cleared her throat. "Mr. Perkins has completed all the necessary background checks, home inspections, and parenting courses. He's been approved for foster placement with potential for adoption pending a 6-month trial period." Briella's eyes went impossibly wide. "You mean I could live with you? For real?" "If you want to," Luka said. "I know I'm not perfect. I know I have a past that's complicated. But I promise you this. I will protect you with everything I have. I will learn to be what you need. And Brutus already loves you more than anything in this world." "What about you?" Briella asked, her voice small but hopeful. "Do you love me?" The question hung in the air, enormous and terrifying. Luka thought about the photograph he kept in his wallet now, about how he'd restructured his entire organization to minimize risk, to create distance from the violence, about how he'd spent 3 weeks learning to braid hair from YouTube videos, just in case, about how this tiny, fearless girl had walked into his life, tamed his monsters, both the four-legged and the internal kind, and made him believe he could be more than the sum of his sins. "Yeah, kid," he said, his voice breaking. "I do." Briella launched herself at him, small arms wrapping around his neck with a fierceness that rivaled any battlefield embrace. Luka caught her, held her, and felt tears, actual tears, streak down his face for the first time in 20 years. "Can we go see Brutus now?" Briella asked against his shoulder. "I bet he's worried." "Yeah," Luka said, standing with her in his arms, this precious, impossible weight. Let's go home. Outside, Brutus saw them coming and began barking, not aggressive, but joyful, his entire body wiggling with excitement. The moment Luka opened the door, Briella tumbled into the back seat, and the dog covered her face with kisses, his stubtail a blur of happiness. Luka climbed into the driver's seat and adjusted the rearview mirror. In it, he could see Briella laughing, Brutus's massive head in her lap, both of them whole. In a way, they'd never been apart. "Mr. Perkins?" Briella called from the back. "You can call me Luka, or—" He hesitated, barely breathing. "Or whatever feels right." Briella smiled, that sunrise smile that had changed his entire world. "Okay, Dad." The word hung in the air like a benediction, like forgiveness, like grace. Luka Perkins, enforcer, criminal, the monster parents warned their children about, felt his broken pieces finally settle into something resembling whole. "Let's go home," he said again, and this time the word meant something it never had before. Family. As they drove through the city, man, girl, and dog, the sunset painted everything in shades of gold. Behind them, St. Catherine's grew smaller in the distance. Ahead, the future stretched uncertain, but no longer empty. Brutus made his purring sound. Briella hummed her nameless tune. And Luka smiled, really smiled, for the first time in his adult life. Sometimes redemption arrives in the most unexpected packages. Sometimes it takes the form of a brave little girl who sees past your monsters to the human underneath. Sometimes it comes with a bulldog who finally found peace. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it offers you a second chance you never knew you deserved. The adoption papers sat on the judge's desk, official and final. "Mr. Perkins," Judge Martinez said, looking over her reading glasses, "I've reviewed your case extensively. Your past gives me pause, but your transformation over these months has been remarkable." Luka sat straighter, Briella's hand gripped tightly in his. Brutus, now a certified therapy dog after months of training with Briella, sat at their feet, his presence calming. "The social worker's reports are glowing," the judge continued. "Briella's therapist notes she's thriving. Her teachers report straight A's and improved social skills. And apparently, you two have become regular volunteers at the children's home?" "Briella's idea," Luka said, glancing down at his daughter. She wanted other kids to have what she has now. Judge Martinez smiled. "Then it is my pleasure to grant this adoption. Congratulations, Mr. Perkins. Briella is officially your daughter." The gavel struck, and with it, the final wall around Luka's heart crumbled completely. Briella threw her arms around him. "We're a real family now." "We always were," Luka whispered into her hair. "From the moment you climbed into my car and fixed everything broken." Outside the courthouse, photographers captured the image that would circulate for days. The city's reformed bad boy, his adopted daughter, and their massive bulldog, all wearing matching smiles. So here's my question for you. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone's life completely changed in an instant? Maybe you were that person, or maybe you were the one who helped change someone else's path. Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes, we all need reminding that redemption is possible, that second chances exist, and that the smallest acts of courage can transform the darkest corners of our world. Because Briella Horton had proven something profound. Nobody could tame Luka Perkins' bulldog until a brave little girl changed everything in seconds. And in doing so, she'd tamed something far more dangerous. She'd tamed a broken man's heart and taught him how to love again.